The Atari Jaguar was the best, right? Just do the math. It was marketed as the world's first 64-bit console, a bold claim that at the time sounded almost otherworldly. Atari, once the name that defined video games themselves, had returned to the battlefield, promising power beyond imagination. Do the math, their campaign boasted, positioning the Jaguar as a quantum leap ahead of its rivals. It was meant to be the machine that restored Atari's crown, that reasserted its legacy after years spent wandering the sidelines of an industry it had helped to create. But history had other plans. The Jaguar didn't bring Atari back to glory. It became the final chapter in a story already nearing its end. A system born from ambition, but undone by confusion. It wanted to lead a revolution, yet struggled to function as a machine, and thus, in just a few short years, Atari's great comeback turned into one of gaming's most infamous cautionary tales. And yet, in a shocking twist, decades later, the Jaguar refuses to die. Collectors restore them, developers still write new games for them, and players continue to argue that beneath its flaws lies something worth rediscovering. Sure, it's easy to dismiss the Jaguar as a failure, but doing so ignores how, in some ways, how strangely ahead of its time it was. 30 years later, people are still playing it. So, this begs the question, was it really that bad? And more importantly, is it worth playing in 2025? I am Lady Arcade, and if you want to help ensure that I can continue to make niche videos on even nicher hardware, then please hit that subscribe button and let's talk about the Atari Jaguar. By the early 1990s, Atari was a shadow of the company that had once defined gaming. The brand had given the world Pong, Asteroids, and the 2600 had spent the previous decade in decline, first losing its dominance in the home console market, then watching its foothold in home computing erode as the Amiga, PC, and Macintosh took over. Under the ownership of Jack Tramiel and his family, Atari had become a lean, pragmatic business, one focused more on survival than vision. Its computers were affordable but uninspired, its handheld links technically impressive but commercially irrelevant, and its software output sparse. For a company that had built its reputation on leading the industry, Atari was now chasing it. By 1991, Tramel's engineers had already been working on a new console codenamed the Panther, a 32-bit system intended to compete with the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. But just as prototypes began to take shape, a team of British hardware specialists at Flare Technology approached Atari with something far more ambitious. Their engineers had previously worked on the Connex multisystem, another ill-fated attempt at next-generation gaming, and they claimed they could deliver a console that would leapfrog the competition entirely. They called it the Jaguar, and it promised 64-bit power, and thus the story of some people's weird favourite game console would begin to take shape. Atari seized the opportunity almost immediately. The Panther was quietly scrapped, and the development of the Jaguar was pushed forward at breakneck speed. In the boardroom, the reasoning was simple. The company couldn't afford to be late to another generation. Sega and Nintendo were already entrenched, and a new player, Sony, was preparing to enter the market with its own console. The idea was that if Atari could release the Jaguar first and position it as the next leap forward in technology, it might just shock the industry back into remembering the name that had started it all. But beneath that renewed ambition was something else entirely: desperation. The Jaguar wasn't born from the same kind of confident innovation that had produced the Atari 2600 or 5200. It was the product of fear. Fear of irrelevance, of extinction, of watching the industry move on without them. And that's what makes a Jaguar so fascinating to revisit today, because behind every marketing boast and every overconfident press release was a company that was trying to will itself back into greatness, not through vision but through pure survival instinct. When Atari unveiled the Jaguar, its marketing hinged on that one bold claim: this was the world's first 64-bit console. Do the math, the advert demanded. A phrase that implied Sega and Nintendo were already obsolete. When we remember that in the early 90s, when bits were still the measure of a system's worth, that number carries some enormous weight. It promised something almost futuristic: polygonal worlds, advanced lighting effects, and realism far beyond what 16-bit systems could ever hope to achieve. The problem was, though, that Atari's maths, as it turns out, wasn't quite as straightforward as it seems. Sitting at the heart of the Jaguar sat three main processors. The heavy lifting was handled by two custom chips designed by the engineers at Flare Technology and codenamed Tom and Jerry. Tom contained a graphics processing unit and a powerful object processor, while Jerry handled the sound, managing digital audio and input-output control. On paper, both were 32-bit RISC processors capable of impressive feats, and when paired together, Atari claimed they formed a 64-bit architecture. In practice, however, the system also relied on a Motorola 68000 processor, the same one used in the Amiga and early Macintosh computers, to coordinate tasks between the two chips. This was the manager, a kind of traffic controller that ensured the rest of the hardware didn't trip over itself. The trouble was, the 68000 quickly became a bottleneck. Developers unfamiliar with parallel programming often defaulted to using it as the main CPU, effectively reducing the Jaguar's theoretical performance to something closer to a high-end 16-bit system. The result was that, while Atari's engineers had indeed built a powerful machine, its design required a level of technical finesse that few studios possessed, especially those already struggling with tight budgets and limited documentation. Developer reactions were mixed. Jeff Minter, the idiosyncratic designer behind Tempest 2000, praised the hardware's raw speed and visual potential, describing it as a proper beast once you know how to talk to it. But others found it nightmarish. Rebecca Heinemann, who worked on Battlesphere, recalled that Atari's development tools were unfinished and poorly documented, forcing programmers to write their own compilers just to make anything run. What could have been an exciting technical playground instead became an exercise in frustration, with each game feeling like a battle against the hardware itself. In theory, the Jaguar could outperform its rivals. It featured 64-bit buses, advanced object rendering and audio capabilities that rivaled even high-end PCs, but all that potential was trapped behind a wall of complexity. Developers didn't have the time to master it, and Atari didn't have the resources to help them. The result was a console remembered by most not for its power, but for its wasted promise. The truth, though, is that the Jaguar wasn't necessarily underpowered, it was undersupported. The Atari Jaguar launched in November of 1993, first appearing in a handful of test markets across North America before rolling out more widely the following year. On paper, this was Atari's great comeback, a triumphant return to the living room after nearly a decade in obscurity. The company promised revolutionary 64-bit gaming at an affordable price of $249, a figure that undercut the competition and suggested real confidence in its hardware. When the machine finally reached store shelves, the excitement quickly evaporated. From the beginning, the Jaguar's launch was marred by confusion. Retailers didn't understand the system, consumers didn't know what made it different, and the early software lineup did little to clarify either point. Atari shipped the console with Cybermorph as a pack-in title, a 3D flight shooter meant to showcase the power of its architecture. It was technically ambitious, full of flat-shaded polygons and smooth camera movement, the kind of thing that looked futuristic in screenshots but felt hollow in motion. Players who expected something resembling the 64-bit revolution were instead met with angular environments and a voice repeating, "Where did you learn to fly?" every few seconds.
Where did you learn to fly? Where did you learn to fly? Where did you learn to fly?
The rest of the launch library did little to help either. Alongside Cybermorph came Trevor McFur in The Crescent Galaxy, Evolution, Dino Dudes and Raiden, games that were competent at best but hardly the showcase titles that needed to convince a skeptical market. To make matters worse, third-party developers were already hesitant to support the platform. After all, Sega and Nintendo had established pipelines and marketing clouds, while Sony's upcoming PlayStation loomed on the horizon with far greater financial backing. By contrast, Atari was relying on nostalgia and the promise of hardware power, neither of which translated into developer confidence. Those who did take the risk often found themselves stranded. The Jaguar's development kits were incomplete, its documentation inconsistent, and its technical support nearly non-existent. Many studios found it much easier to port older 16-bit games rather than build new ones that truly leveraged the hardware's potential. As a result, most of the early titles looked more like late-generation Super Nintendo releases than anything remotely next-gen. Reviewers were quick to notice. Electronic Gaming Monthly criticised the system for talking 64-bit but walking 16-bit, while GamePro described its library as a confused mix of potential and disappointment. Sales reflected this growing disillusionment. Despite Atari's claims of strong pre-orders, estimates suggest that fewer than 150,000 units were sold in its first year, a disastrous figure for what was supposed to be the company's grand return. Retailers grew frustrated with slow turnover and returned stock, while consumers moved on to more promising platforms. The irony was painful. Atari had built a machine powerful enough to impress engineers, but had launched it in such a state that it couldn't impress anyone else. In the end, the Jaguar's failure to take off wasn't a matter of bad luck, it was self-inflicted. The console that had shouted about 64 bits arrived with games that looked 16-bit, and the company that had once led an industry found itself struggling to even keep up with it. But that didn't mean that there weren't still reasons around for consumers to fall in love with the machine. For all its technical missteps and marketing blunders, the Atari Jaguar was not without brilliance. Beneath the noise of its overblown advertising and the gloom of its commercial failure were flashes of genuine creativity. Games that not only proved the hardware could deliver, but in some cases hinted at a very different legacy the Jaguar might have enjoyed had things gone differently. The most obvious starting point is Alien vs Predator, a title that arrived early in the Jaguar's life and, for a brief moment, made the console feel like the future. Developed by Rebellion, it was unlike anything else available on home hardware at the time, a fully 3D first-person shooter that placed players in the role of either alien, predator, or marine, each with distinct mechanics, objectives, and atmospheres. The game's dimly lit corridors, grainy textures, and eerie silence created a level of tension that rivaled early PC horror experiences, making it one of the most atmospheric console games of its generation. Contemporary reviews were stunned. GameFan called it a new benchmark in immersion, and even now its slow pace and claustrophobic design feel purposeful, not primitive. Alien vs Predator remains proof that, when used correctly, the Atari Jaguar could deliver something special. Then there was Tempest 2000, Jeff Minter's hypnotic reinvention of the 1981 arcade classic. It was everything the Jaguar's marketing promised, but the console itself rarely delivered. Fast, stylish, and utterly unique. Minter's signature blend of neon geometry and pulsating techno transformed a simple vector shooter into a transcendent sensory experience, one that critics described as pure audio-visual ecstasy. The soundtrack alone, composed by Ian Howe, became legendary among fans of electronic music, and even today, Tempest 2000 feels alive in a way few retro titles do. It is the Jaguar's definitive masterpiece, a game so confident in its identity that it transcends the limitations of its platform entirely. There were others too. Games that hinted at what the Jaguar could have been had more developers truly understood it. Iron Soldier, developed by Eclipse Software Design, delivered an impressive open-world mech combat experience years before such concepts became commonplace. Its destructible environments and smooth frame rates showcased how well the console could handle 3D when properly coded. Rayman, meanwhile, remains one of the system's most important releases, not just for its technical quality, but for what it represented: Ubisoft's leap from obscurity to international recognition. The Jaguar version, with its vibrant hand-drawn art and fluid animation, was so visually stunning that it's often mistaken for a later PlayStation or Saturn release. Even the ports, often dismantled as afterthoughts, carried their own significance. Doom on the Jaguar was one of the best home conversions of the game at the time, featuring larger play areas and smoother performance than the Super Nintendo version. Wolfenstein 3D fared just as well, pushing the system's processing power to deliver fluid motion and sharp sound. These were not lazy cash-ins, but vital demonstrations that the Jaguar could handle the cutting edge of PC gaming, an impressive feat for 1994. Individually, none of these games could have saved the Jaguar. Collectively, though, they reveal something crucial. The console's potential wasn't imaginary, it was real, just never fully realised. The Jaguar's library may be small, inconsistent and often derided, but within it lies a surprising amount of artistry and innovation. The Jaguar's legacy then isn't defined by quantity, but by curiosity. It's a console remembered not for the games it failed to produce, but for the handful that proved what it could have been, a machine that, for all its faults, still managed to deliver moments of brilliance worth rediscovering today. All in all, the Jaguar boasts a respectable library of decent games, but it's impossible to talk about the system without mentioning its infamous add-on. When Atari announced the Jaguar CD in 1995, it was framed as the company's next big leap forward, an ambitious add-on that would finally unleash the full potential of their beleaguered 64-bit console. In reality, it felt more like a desperate afterthought, a final roll of the dice from a company already running on fumes. Even its physical design didn't help matters. The bulbous drive sat awkwardly atop the Atari's already angular shell, earning it the unflattering nickname the toilet lid. It was a fitting metaphor, an add-on shaped like a toilet lid at a time when Atari had already run out of flushes. Still, for all the jokes made at its expense, the Jaguar CD wasn't entirely without merit. At a time when CD-ROM technology was becoming the industry's new standard, Atari wanted to prove that it could keep pace with Sega's Mega CD and the emerging wave of disc-based consoles. The add-on came bundled with an impressive piece of software called the Virtual Light Machine, created by Jeff Minter. It turned music CDs into dazzling visual displays of colour and light, reacting in real time to sound input, essentially an early interactive visualizer long before such things were commonplace. Unfortunately, the rest of the Jaguar CD story, though, is far less inspiring. Only a handful of games were ever released, and most arrived too late to make any impact. Titles like Battlemorph, a sequel to Cybermorph, showcased smooth flight mechanics and rich environments that genuinely pushed the hardware further than the base console ever had. Primal Rage CD brought improved animation and audio, and Blue Lightning offered a flashy, if shallow, attempt at an Afterburner-style experience. They were competent, sometimes even impressive, but they weren't enough. Essentially, the add-on suffered from the same core issues that had plagued the main console: scarce third-party support, minimal marketing, and virtually no retail presence. Developers had already moved on to the PlayStation and Saturn, both of which offered more advanced CD hardware and exponentially larger audiences. Even within Atari, confidence was evaporating. Internal memos revealed that the company's leadership had begun seeking buyers for its remaining assets before the Jaguar CD even reached shelves. In fact, by the time the Jaguar CD launched, it wasn't a product of hope, it was one of inertia. Atari released it because it had nothing else left to release. It was a fascinating piece of hardware in its own right, showing flickers of imagination, but it symbolised the company's exhaustion more than its ambition. It seemed that by the time the Jaguar CD actually arrived on the market, even Atari didn't believe in Atari anymore. By 1996, Atari's long struggle to reclaim its former glory had finally reached its end. Mounting debts, poor sales, and an evaporating retail presence left the company with few options beyond surrender. That year, Atari Corporation merged with the hard drive manufacturer JTS, a move presented publicly as a strategic consolidation, but in truth, little more than a quiet retreat. The deal effectively ended Atari's involvement in the hardware business. Within months, its offices were shuttered, its staff dismissed, and its once proud name reduced to little more than a logo and a warehouse full of unsold Jaguars. For the company that had given birth to the video game industry, it was an ignominious final act. But while Atari itself faded into corporate obscurity, the Jaguar's story didn't end there. In 1999, something remarkable happened. Hasbro Interactive, which had acquired the rights to Atari's catalogue, made a decision that would change the console's fate forever. It released the Jaguar's patents and declared the platform an open system. This meant that anyone, anywhere could legally develop and distribute software for it without fear of legal reprisal. So, what was once a commercial dead end suddenly became a creative free space. Almost overnight, the Jaguar found a second life. Homebrew developers, many of them fans who had grown up with the system, began exploring its hardware with the kind of patience and understanding that professional studios in the 90s had lacked. Projects like Battlesphere, Protector and Skyhammer emerged, each demonstrating not only technical mastery but genuine artistic affection for the console. Battlesphere in particular became a legend among collectors, a network-based combat simulator that pushed the Jaguar far beyond anything Atari itself had achieved, complete with 3D environments, multiplayer support and a level of polish that stood as a quiet rebuke to the company's original efforts. Over the following decades, independent creators continued to breathe life into the platform. Modern releases such as Rebooteroid, Downfall and Another World ports have joined the growing library, proving that the Jaguar's hardware still has untapped potential even 30 years later. The irony is profound. The Jaguar failed as a product but succeeded as a project. It began as a desperate corporate experiment and ended up as a community-driven celebration of creativity. For a console once dismissed as being one of gaming's great disasters, its afterlife has been surprisingly dignified. So, sure, the Jaguar failed commercially, but it succeeded spiritually, reborn through the passion of the very fans it once disappointed. For those curious enough to experience the Atari Jaguar in 2025, the good news is that it's easier to do so than ever before, though not necessarily cheaper. Original hardware still circulates among collectors, but prices have risen sharply in recent years. Working Jaguar consoles routinely sell for several £100s, and the CD add-on, plagued by unreliable drives and brittle plastics, can cost as much as a modern PlayStation 5 if you can even find one that functions properly. It's a machine that demands patience, money, and a fair amount of luck, which only adds to its mythical status among retro enthusiasts. It has essentially become a luxury item for gamers to actually own. Fortunately, there are far more accessible alternatives to buying a rare, expensive pile of games. For those who simply want to explore its library, the most popular option today is the Jaguar Game Drive, an SD-based flash cartridge produced by Retro HQ that allows users to load both cartridge and CD games from a single card. It's a seamless and elegant solution that bypasses the Jaguar CD's mechanical frailty entirely, offering instant access to nearly the system's entire catalogue, including homebrew releases. For those who want an authentic experience without the pain of constant hardware failures, it's reportedly the best way to play on original equipment. For everyone else, there's Big P Emu, a remarkable emulator that has transformed how people experience the Jaguar. Created by Richard Whitehouse, it offers near-perfect emulation, support for the full CD library, and even online multiplayer, something that the original hardware could only dream of. Its user-friendly interface and broad compatibility mean that, for the first time, exploring the Jaguar no longer requires specialist knowledge or nostalgia-tinted determination. It has effectively democratized access to one of gaming's most misunderstood consoles. Then there's the Atari 50 Collection, Digital Eclipse's interactive documentary that reintroduces portions of the Jaguar's legacy to a modern audience. While it only includes a handful of games such as Tempest 2000 and Cybermorph, its presentation contextualizes them within Atari's broader history, giving players a sense of how bold and how doomed the company's ambitions were. It's less about playing the Jaguar in isolation and more about understanding it as a piece of the larger story. If you want to add that collection to your collection, I do have some good news. Below, I've placed an affiliate link that will get you 87% off, reducing the Mammoth compilation to under £4. Regardless of which way you choose to do it in 2025, playing the Jaguar isn't about convenience, it's about curiosity. This is a console you seek out because you want to understand it, not because it fits easily into your modern gaming setup. Its appeal lies in the contrast it offers, a window into an era when risk and innovation mattered more than polish or predictability. The barrier to entry may be lower today, but the Jaguar remains a niche pursuit. And perhaps that's exactly how it should be. Its flaws and quirks are a part of its charm and a reminder that even a failure can be worth revisiting. So the Atari Jaguar was a failure, yes, but it was also something far more interesting than that. It was a final act of rebellion from the company that created gaming as we know it, a defiant swing from a once mighty name, refusing to go quietly into history. It was bold, messy, and often misguided, yet within that chaos lay genuine imagination. In trying to leap ahead of its time, Atari stumbled over its own ambition, but even now it's difficult not to admire the sheer audacity of the attempt. The Jaguar isn't for everyone. It's not a console you buy for convenience, comfort, or a polished library. It's for those who love underdogs, who find beauty in imperfection, and who enjoy the romance of lost potential. Playing the Jaguar in 2025 isn't just about nostalgia, it's about reconnecting with a time when the gaming industry still allowed itself to dream recklessly, when failure was a part of discovery, not the end of it. It didn't save Atari, but it left behind something far more enduring. A reminder that creativity doesn't always win, but it always matters. This is a brand new channel, so if you want more like this, subscribe and then check out my uploads on the 3DO and Amiga CD32. See you soon.